All right, let me get this evening kicked off. It's an absolute pleasure to join you again tonight tonight in the US and the morning in Shanghai. And I hope we're joined both by students and colleagues in America and in China, and probably points elsewhere across the campus, given the global reach of our programs. I'm Michael Diamond. I'm the academic director of the Department of Integrated Marketing and Communications, one of the academic departments in the Division of Programs and Business at NYU School of Professional Studies. And it's my absolute pleasure to introduce this evening's program. I'm joined, as always, by Bryce Whitwam and Paul Lin, two of our phenomenal faculty who are actually teaching in Shanghai for about 150 of our students who are studying with us in Shanghai, and both extraordinary marketing professionals in their own right. But this occasion gives us a chance to hear directly from Dhiren Amin, who is the CMO of Kraft Heinz for Asia, who spent some of his professional time in Jakarta most recently and has been in Shanghai, I think you said, since 2020. So we're absolutely delighted that he's going to give us his perspective and his unique view on building brands in China or China speed. Couple of housekeeping things. If anyone wants to ask a question, you'll need to use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and I'll be monitoring that. We have Dhiren making a presentation for about 15-20 minutes, and then we're going to go into sort of a moderated Q&A, Bryce, Paul, and I, and Dhiren in conversation, but I'll keep an eye on any questions coming in from the participants and try and make sure those become part of the conversation. So without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Dhiren to our school and our community, and I'll turn it over to you, Dhiren.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thanks for your time. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to talk to some of your students and people who have joined the webinar. I'm going to, like you said, I'm a marketer. I've been, just a quick introduction. I've been doing marketing for close to 17 years now. That almost belies my age, reveals my age actually, which isn't a good thing. A majority of it, for the first half of it was spent in India. And then from 2013 onwards, I've been in different parts of Asia. So I started off in Singapore with Unilever, and then I moved to Jakarta as a CMO for Kraft Heinz Indonesia in 2016. And I've been in China, in Shanghai since 2020, running marketing for Asia. So that's been a bit of my professional journey. I'm going to, like you said, I'm going to take people through a short presentation, 15-20 minutes, but I'm hoping to get done quickly and then have a chat with everybody. 1 second, please. Yeah, share sound. Okay. So the topic of my presentation and what we'll talk about today is actually building brands at China speed. One of the things that nobody tells you when you're a person from not from China moving to China as a marketer is the speed at which China operates. The one thing that is truly unique to China is its speed. Yet the core competency of marketers and companies like ours is to build brands, and that creates an anomaly, which is how do you build brands at China speed? And I'll talk a little bit more about that because it's a topic that has always fascinated me. Just some statistics, a lot of people on this call are learned, they would know this already, but China has seen more urbanization and economic change than any other country in the world in the last 30 years. If you see from left to right, the live change index actually captures the per capita GDP growth. You can see the level of growth that China has had since 1990 to 2019. That is far and away much higher than any other country. The chart in the middle actually shows the number of mega cities that have cropped up in the last 30 years across different countries. And if you look at that ranking, China has 10 mega cities, are essentially cities with more than 10 million people. The USA has 0. India has 6, and all of Europe has only 3. And this again has developed in the last 30 years. And then, of course, the famous chart that a lot of people will talk about is there are cities in China whose economic growth and whose GDP rivals many countries. And this is an interesting chart that shows that actually Chengdu's GDP or Chengdu's economy is bigger than Norway, and Nanjing's economy is bigger than Austria, and so on and so forth. So the amount of urbanization and change that China has seen economically and otherwise in the last 30 years is significantly higher than any other country. And that in itself talks a lot about its speed. These are just some, that was quantitative. These are just some qualitative examples I've taken off the internet. If you look at 1978, the speed of a train in China was 43 kmph per hour. And today, of course, the fastest train in China goes at 350 kmph. So there are many such examples of how things have changed in China at rapid speed, which if you don't live in China, you will not entirely understand. This is most reflective in the digital ecosystem, which has evolved as rapidly. In any metric that you pick up in terms of digital penetration and growth, China leads. If you talk about the number of internet users, it leads. Mobile penetration, it leads. Retail e-commerce, of course, it leads. If you look at the chart at the bottom left, the rapid rise of China's internet and e-commerce giants has been phenomenal. It's not something the other people don't come on this chart, not because they're not there, it's because they don't make it. And that's the big difference finally. And the last part is, while everybody else talks about digital maturity, China has moved omni-channel, right? If you talk about the retail landscape, everybody else talks about how we manage e-commerce and digital. China has moved on, and Chinese consumers have moved on to a truly omni-channel experience. And this chart actually shows the number of people who actually engage in online and offline before they make a purchase. And it's extremely high for China compared to any other part of the world. So again, talks a lot about the speed of change, which is reflected in the digital penetration. And finally, as practitioners, we are all used to looking at trends. If you look at trends that are true of China, these trends, this is something that McKinsey released: the great retail integration, the virtualization of services, the mobility, not the mobile, the mobility revolution, digitization of social life, supply chain digitization, and digital urbanization. These trends, if you compare to other parts of the world, wouldn't show up. So China's forward-looking trends are actually pipe dreams for even the most developed economies. So it operates at a different scale and pace in terms of its trends compared to other countries. And the reason for that is actually this, which is China is already, this is a slide from Bain, China is already in its third phase of development. The first phase of development was the world for China. So China as a consumption market for the rest of the world. The second phase, which we all still talk about, is China for China, which is Chinese companies and brands making products for Chinese people because of the population and their economic value. Today, it's about China for the world. It's about Chinese brands having global ambitions. And that is the phase that China is in today. It's very different from the rest of the world. And that is an inherent anomaly that global brands operating in China have to deal with. So if you're a global brand in China, you want to win in China. Your competition wants to win in the world. And that's the inherent challenge. The basic landscape of what you see as your competitive set and what they see as their competitive set is entirely different. And so you're fighting a set of brands who may not think of you as competition, because for them, winning in the world is competition. And these are just some examples of those kind of brands, right? And so this creates a strange anomaly if you're a marketer. I've always said that the role of marketing is commercial crafting. The value we deliver is commerce. The job we do is crafting. So commerce is delivering net sales, delivering profitability, and delivering competitive wins like market share, penetration, consumption. What we deliver it through our tools is creating strong brand propositions, creating packs and products that win versus competition at the right price, and having the right promotion mechanisms, both above and below the line, that allow for the company to invest in the right spaces and earn the right payback. So these are our tools, and this is what we deliver. The challenge for marketers in China are two. Crafting requires time. So how do brands craft at China speed without compromising on quality? That's the first challenge that any marketer who's based in China faces, right? Crafting is a skill. You don't write a brand proposition overnight. You don't create a product overnight. You don't create a pack overnight. And if you do, you're most likely compromising on quality. But the China demands are doing it fast. So how do you hold on to quality while doing things at China speed? And the second is, how do global companies managing global and local brands succeed against brands that have global ambitions? So that's again, so how do you win when your competitive set is actually looking for global success? And these are the two anomalies that all marketers in most categories in China will face. So the challenge, actually, like most things in life, is bigger than the answer, is more weighty than the answer. Because my approach to this, and there are many different approaches, so all I can tell you is our approach as a company is to do 5 things well. It's creating brands with purpose. It's creating platforms around which our brands can create content. It's ensuring that we tap into pop culture all the time. It's ensuring, and this is very important in China, it's ensuring that we have the right partnerships with the right content creators or the right partners, and measuring performance diligently all the time. So these are the 5 things that we as a company try and do over and over again to try and succeed. And this is underlined by the enablers, which we call innovation transformation. And innovation transformation, I'll talk in a minute. And second is content and digital transformation. So all of these things need to be underpinned by the enablers of continuous content and digital transformation and innovation transformation. I'm going to show you examples of the first 4, which is purpose, platform, pop culture, and partnerships. I'm not going to talk about performance today because performance gets into data that is obviously inherently valuable to the company. And then I'm going to talk about digital transformation very quickly. But I'm going to talk less and show more case studies, right? In any part, and the first one I'd want to start with is purpose. This is the one thing that shouldn't change, irrespective of which part of the world you work in. There is enough evidence to tell marketers that brands with purpose grow faster than brands without purpose. The challenge for marketers is to identify if your brand needs a purpose. And even in China, that is true. In China, for example, you're always working in a competitive set where functional attributes of your category are very important. And sometimes winning on those functional attributes is absolutely necessary before moving to purpose. But every once in a while, there is a need. And so I'm going to show you an example of a brand that we had to move towards a purpose-led approach to win in China. And then we'll talk. So this is the first case study I want to show you for a brand that we have called Guanghe, which is a fermented bean brand. The case should explain itself. So I'm going to just play the video.
How does an aging brand in a dying category appeal to a post-80s generation? The only way for the Guanghe fermented bean curd to grow is to premiumize by tapping into its strengths. A taste and packaging that has remained unchanged since 1893. Amidst China's rapid development, this unchanging taste of Guanghe is little of what's left of most people's childhoods. And this led to an insight. In a world of abundant choices and new food experiences, the comforting taste of childhood is cherished more than ever. Guanghe wanted to bring back this nostalgic experience and taste to the young consumers and help them regain a lost piece of their childhood. Guanghe fermented bean curd, preserve a piece of childhood. Act 4 deployment. They recreated miniature models replicating childhood scenes people grew up with. and hid them in the forgotten corners of the city. Millennials were then invited to go on an immersive exploration to hunt for these pieces of memories.
像我小时候就是出去玩之后就不回家，然后我妈就要在外面扯着嗓子大喊要回家吃饭了。
小的时候家里要做饭做菜，就会打发我到大街上去买点腐乳，这种就是这种店面真的是一模一样的。
The idea was amplified through a documentary showing the making of these miniatures. By helping young consumers bring back their lost childhood memories, we have transformed these precious memories into premium value growth for this traditional brand. Guanghe fermented bean curd, preserve a piece of childhood. How does...
So in reality, that's, in the most conventional definition of purpose, that's not a purpose, right? It doesn't talk about equality. It doesn't talk about, change in beauty norms. It's a more realistic purpose. In reality, it's a territory around preserving childhood that we needed to embrace to be able to grow the target audience of this brand. And we couldn't have done it through a functional story. And that's why we did this. The only thing that I think people should remember when they go down this journey is there is no free lunch even with purpose. We need to be socially responsible, profit-generating brands if you are going to embrace purpose. Because at the end of the day, it needs to show competitive wins for the company for you to continue investing in that purpose and make it meaningful. So this is the first approach that we have, which is crafting brands with purpose when there is a need. The second is platforms. And platforms is inherently important in China just because of the amount of content that you have to create. Content is required to interact with consumers in China on a daily basis, and that's not an exaggeration. There is a whole engine of work that is required to continue talking to your consumers and engaging with them through different touch points. That can't be done sporadically. You need to have a platform around which consumers want to talk to you, and a platform around which you can create content that consumers will find interesting. And again, I'm going to show you an example for our biggest brand in China, which is Masters, called Veshida, actually in Chinese, for which we actually created a platform of this nature. And then I'll talk a little more about it. So here's the case.
Chinese women, like all women, love to experiment in the kitchen. An extra stir here, a sprinkling of pepper there. Yet the world of cooking is defined by structure and precision, the recipe book. Master wanted to be the brand that gave women the confidence to cook by giving them the platform to experiment. Presenting freestyle cooking, Master's way of liberating women from the tyranny of the recipe. By adding Wei Jixian's superior umami flavor in their cooking, women get the extra boost of confidence that their dishes will taste great, however they freestyle their cooking. The campaign was launched with a manifesto film and KOL videos. A cooking blind box TikTok challenge was held to challenge food influencers to recreate signature dishes. They were each given a blind box, packed with 15 ingredients and a Wei Jixian soy sauce.
因此，我选用了一次榨取3倍鲜香的味士达味极鲜酱油，
And the campaign cooked up great results. Our market share increased significantly, while our net sales grew by 12.6%. We also successfully widened the gap with our key competitor, Haitian. But the best thing, we showed women in China that they can explore more possibilities in cooking.
Yeah, so the thing about platforms is our platform was around freestyle cooking. Freestyle cooking is about experimentation. So around the platform of freestyle cooking, we have now been creating content and getting women to create content for us on how they experiment with cooking at home. So that allows for us to continuously make content that is relevant to people. That's the definition of a platform. And if you don't have that, your brand will not have a voice and your brand will not have a personality with which it is associated. So platforms, especially in China, for content creation are very important. The third is actually pop culture, which should be retrospectively self-evident, but the concept of pop culture is identifying things that are culturally relevant and building opportunities for your brand to be able to tap into that and grow. Pop culture changes in China faster than, again, it changes in most parts of the world. What is a trend today will become a part of the dustbin tomorrow. So identifying trends and staying true to the pop culture in China is also a challenge that marketers face. I'm going to give you an example of how we use pop culture to our advantage. And this is actually an example of a global brand, which is Heinz. So have a look at the video and we'll talk.
Everyone in the West loves ketchup, but that same love does not translate to China, as a low 37% penetration indicates. Heinz is the undisputed market leader in ketchup in China, but its challenge is large, and that is to create a much, much larger market by creating a culture of Western cooking to China. Western festivals like Christmas provide the perfect opportunity. But herein lies the challenge. Christmas is irrelevant to China, but whilst people in China don't celebrate Christmas, they do love Christmas songs. Presenting the Heinz Christmas Ketchup Carols, recipe videos for popular Western foods, narrated through famous Christmas carols.
Ladies and gentlemen, Heinz. 整个包，一起做汉堡。面包不平加生菜，牛肉饼要煎熬。
With the singing bottle packaged into a gift box with ketchup sauce for e-commerce platforms. This idea gained traction on social platforms like TikTok, where KOLs and celebrities shared themselves listening and cooking Western dishes to these songs. The campaign launched gained more than 21 million impressions on TikTok, with engagement rates over 3 times the industry benchmark. It changed the conversation on Western food in China and got people to jingle their way to Western cooking this Christmas. And Heinz Ketchup had their most festive year in years.
So here's the thing, right? The thing about pop culture is there is no culture of Christmas in China, right? It's not a festival that they celebrate, but there is a concept of people understanding the jingles. The idea of marrying these two led to the insight that led to this work. And as a brand, Heinz needs to be a brand that stands for and creates a culture of Western cooking in China. And so it needs to have moments like Christmas, Halloween, where we can activate the brand. And this was just a good understanding of what actually is the cultural tension that exists that allowed for us to create this work. I'm actually not going to show this video because I think we're going to run out of time for questions. But in China, one of the most important things to do is to work with KOLs. And you cannot survive in your media landscape without having a strong KOL strategy. So actually, partnerships become very important. You can have a transactional relationship with KOLs, and which is what most people do, or you can have a relationship where the KOL will co-opt and work with your brand to be able to give it the uplift it needs. So this case, which I'll not show you, I can share later, is an example of the brand that I showed you in the first case, Guanghe, actually pairing up with one of the lead food KOLs to create a 15-minute film. The logic of that was that we needed to associate Guanghe with modern Chinese and Western dishes. And hence we had tied up with one of the biggest food stores or food chains to be able to create customized recipes, pairing Guanghe with pasta, pairing Guanghe with pizza, pairing Guanghe with duck. And then we had to pair with the KOL to be able to create a film that amplified this partnership. So there were 2 partnerships, one with a famous local store for co-creating the recipes, and 2 with a KOL who's one of the top food KOLs to create content that amplified this. And that essentially became the campaign. The agency worked on the basic parameters of what the KOL should say, but primarily the work was done by the KOL. the recipes were created by the store. And that is something you have to embrace in China, which for brands and marketers is uncomfortable because you're used to having control on the content you create. You're used to having control on the recipes you create. But in China, sometimes you have to be able to let go of that and rely on partners to be able to do that for you. So that's my fourth. I'm not going to show the video in the interest of time. And my last point is you can't do all of this unless you have a digital transformation agenda. I just showed you 4 pieces of work, and all of those were done in the last 12 months. And all you saw was actually the main films, but all of those have work that happens every day. And so in China, you need to have the ability to have real-time content creation for social and digital conversations. You are working in an environment where e-commerce is important, but to play in e-commerce properly, you need to have content and media deployment that's done every day. And you need to have continuous brand content influence on KOL and KOC content. And so you can't do this in the traditional model of creation. You have to have, essentially, I think, most people will do it differently, but I'll say how we did it in Kraft Heinz. We created an in-house model called the kitchen, which is a set of content creators, a set of data analysts, and a set of media people all sitting together to create this content real time by listening to consumers and what they say in the digital and e-commerce space, to be able to create content that can talk to consumers every day, because that's just table stakes in China, and without that you can't survive. So that's it. I'll end my presentation here. The challenge for brands in China is to craft at China speed, which is tough. And we do it with 5 things. We do it with purpose, platforms, partnership, performance, and then all of that underpinned by digital transformation. Thank you.
Fantastic, Dhiren. Thank you so much. I think you managed to pack a lot into those 20 minutes or so, and somehow it wasn't too fast, which was good. So I think we were able to inculcate a lot of what you said, and it resonates a lot, I think, with our audience, because we've been really, talking about this and thinking about the various ways that China is different and lessons we can learn. I wonder if I could kick off with a question, then I'll shoot back to Bryce. But I'll be the first. I'm a bit of a foodie, and food is a very cultural specific thing. It's all about local tastes and very unique, experiences, as you described. How does a brand, you showed us some of the repositioning of Heinz ketchup, but how much do you think how challenging has it been, particularly for food brands, global food brands, to make headway in China, on the assumption, which might not be true, that the local tastes are very different, from a Western taste or a Western experience, etc.
So some context. So Kraft Heinz in China is not just Heinz. The examples that I showed you are Masters, Guanghe, and Heinz. Master and Guanghe are both local brands that Kraft Heinz has the privilege of owning. And then, of course, there is Heinz. So very different. I mean, if you're a local brand, you're going to behave extremely locally. Your ownership status has nothing to do with what the brand is, right? So let's talk about Heinz. Local, it depends on your strategy is my answer. So for example, if you're a global brand associated with global cuisines, you may take a stance that actually global cuisines or global food in China is growing. So Yum, for example, Yum in China is the 4th largest fast food company in the world. So obviously it says something about how fast American food is growing in China. And so you could take a stance that actually there is enough and more evidence that that global cuisines are becoming big in China, and you will perpetrate and be part of that conversation, right? That's stance 1, and you could be right or wrong on that, and you will realize. The other way to think of it is to say that I will pair myself in cooking with local cuisines. Again, something that you could try. It is tougher and it takes time, because you're trying to tell people that an inherently alien taste and product is going to pair well with local dishes, even if it is true, which for example it is true for Heinz. It will take a lot of education. We do both. So for us, ensuring that we create a culture of Western cooking in China is important, but equally it is going forward important that we are associated with at least fusion Chinese cooking. So my answer to that is it's entirely dependent on the outlook you take to your strategy to that market and the pointers to the food you want to associate
with. Yeah, I'll follow up, Bryce, if it's okay, and then because I want to explore a little bit this question of, at least it's our understanding that some of those bigger brands, Western brands, have had a harder time, gaining a foothold in the Chinese market. And, a colleague of mine has been doing a study about coffee, and is it Luckin Coffee, which is the local coffee stores, which somehow have been running rings around Starbucks and other West Costa Coffee or whatever it was that tried to come in, So do you have, I'm just intrigued, like, do you have a perspective about where some of those bigger brands have perhaps failed, or why that has been as much of a challenge as it might have been?
I think honestly, if you come to China and don't have a model of creating in China, deploying in China, and most importantly, deciding in China, you will fail. China is an inherently local model, right? So if you're a global company who tries to rely on global innovations and the pace at which you create global innovations and products, you're not likely to win in China. If you operate in China, the only way to operate in China is at China speed. The brands that don't operate at China speed fail. The brands that operate at China speed succeed. And that can only be done with a fiercely localized model and leadership. So that's actually my perspective on that. It's got very little to do with the actual brand. It's got a lot to do with the mindset of management of that brand. And that needs to be extremely localized for success.
That's really interesting, Dhiren. I have a question here from the Q&A panel, and definitely if you have a question you'd like to ask, just please write it out and submit it on the Q&A part of the section. The question is, what social platform in China would you recommend would be the most important for a global brand to be on, especially for a KOL-led brand building campaign to target Gen Z? Is there one specific channel?
I'll probably give a straight answer and then the real answer. The straight answer is Gen Z or not, but okay, if the question is Gen Z, of course, Douyin. You'd want to be on Douyin and TikTok, as you call it. But the real answer is the Chinese media landscape is so vast and nuanced that there can't be a singular answer to that question. The Gen Z is the target audience. The second thing you need to take into account on that one is what is the nature of your brand? What is the nature of the content you're creating? And that may have an entirely different, that may lead you to an entirely different media choice. So even if you're targeting Gen Zs, because of the nature of the content you create and because of the objective you have, which may be around reach, you may go for a channel sponsorship. And that may be all right because we don't recognize it, but a lot of Gen Zs watch a lot of the sponsor shows on TV still. So the answer people want to hear is probably Douyin. The answer I will give is it entirely depends on your communication and media strategy married with the content that you want to put out there.
Great. Paul?
Yeah, let me just build on that, Dhiren, because I was really interested in this whole kitchen concept, right? And being in social media for a very long time, working in North America and now in China, it felt very much like an editorial sort of newsroom approach, right? If you think about classic journalism, you think about PR as an industry, how to tap into social listening, social insights, analyzing them, and then developing products. Can you just talk a little bit about the operational element of localization right? Because that's really fascinating to me in terms of how you're able to set up approvals in a way that that minimize all the different layers. You know, you're a multinational food brand that there's probably some level of health approval that you need to go through. You need to bottle it, you need to make it, you need to distribute it and put it in product on shelf. Very different than an internet product that could literally iterate, set up a beta, launch it online, and people download it, right? So I'm more interested in the operational element, getting the approvals, the bureaucracy of how Heinz has sort of been able to minimize that and do it at China speed. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So let's separate the two, because I think you have two questions in what you asked. The first is about the kitchen, and the second is about innovation. So I'm going to separate these two. See, I think you were quite complimentary in calling it like a newsroom approach. I wish it was anything as fancy as that. It's not. It truly is. It's a data cell that has access to. Let's talk about basics. It has access to social listening, and a large social listening pool is necessary for any of these analysts to do their job. They will have access to the data stacks that you would get from various different sources, e-commerce and social related. They look at that on an everyday basis and they come up with, okay, this is what people are saying to the content that we have put out. This is what people are saying to our product pages on e-commerce, and they use that intelligence and share it with the brand guys. The brand guys then work with that and the content team, which is in-house, to create content that responds to what people are saying. And then the media team takes that. I mean, media team works concurrently, takes that content and puts the right level of media money behind it to be able to amplify it. Because unlike what most people think, the job doesn't end by just the social listening and creating the content. For it to be seen, there still needs to be a media strategy to amplify. This is done on a I would like to say every day, but let's say it's once every 2 days. It's an iterative process. So that's what this cell does. Then the other thing it does is it creates trend papers and things like that is shared with the brand team and the leadership, that allows for us to know what's happening in the market, and we use some of that in the crafting of our innovations and content. So that's the kitchen. Its approval process is actually liberated. Because it involves the media team, the brand team, and it's within marketing. It's pretty fast. There is no inherent drama there. So that's the answer to the kitchen. On innovations, I think you have to remember innovations have to be made for China. Like I said, I keep repeating it, need to be done at China speed. So the local teams need to, and in our case, thankfully, are fully empowered to be able to develop those innovations at speed. We actually have something called an innovation hub within Kraft Heinz in China, whose primary purpose is to actually power through innovations, where you cut through what you would otherwise of different departments having different agendas. All the departments that are responsible for developing innovations, which is marketing, R&D, quality, supply chain, all essentially are part of that one unit. They report to, they have a single reporting structure, and their primary job is to push out innovations well crafted and at speed. So again, their approval process and their processes are set up differently from the rest of the company in that sense, so that they can operate at speed. And this was not something that was an aha moment for us, or not something that I can say, we did differently from others. I believe a lot of companies who are global brands and successful in China would probably take this approach. And so it's not new to us. It's just something that we have to do to operate at China. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's a fascinating, insight. I think this notion of, we're hypothesizing, being inside a big company, it's terribly bureaucratic and hard to get decisions made. And, I think all three of us have worked in big companies, so perhaps we're carrying the burden of that experience a little bit, but it sounds like you've solved that in a very interesting way with this innovation hub. I wanted to pivot a little bit. There was actually a very interesting question from David Vanny here, and it's got me thinking. What he's asking of you is, are Chinese brands truly building brands, in the classic sense that we would think about it, or is it really a question of sales? So, you know, I mean, it's kind of, you know, buried in there is probably a whole bunch of other debates that go on in marketing all the time, you know, about performance versus brand building. But, you know, I think he's trying to get at this question of, you know, how much, at least do you see in the marketplace, you know, the balance between, you know, promotional spending and, you know, discounting and things like that versus real brand building. And then in that context, you know, how does a Kraft Heinz play as a premium foreign brand? And I recognize, you know, only you've got many local products, but, you know, how do you think about that space? Because you're a company that has built your heritage on building brands, you know. So
it's an interesting question. I don't think anybody has a real answer to that. Firstly, let's break that down. So Chinese brands are creating brands. If they weren't creating brands, there wouldn't be a Chinese brand in the top 10 global brands in the world, which didn't exist 10 years back. So I don't think any of us should make the mistake of saying Chinese brands are not being created. They are being created. They are being created in an entirely different way because their ecosystem in which they operate is different, right? And that brings me to the question of the ecosystem. The ecosystem that colors everybody's judgment of this is e-commerce, where the model of working in e-commerce is high advertising spends to buy traffic, heavy promotions to drive discounts and hence drive high volume. And these are brands that have come through an ecosystem of digital and social and e-commerce, which becomes the lens through which they are judged, right? By itself, that is true. It is a challenge for global brands, or actually, it's not a challenge for global brands. It's a challenge for all brands to play in that ecosystem, because that is the way that ecosystem works. High advertising spends, high promotions, and being able to drive volume. The trick, I think, is to be able to manage your marketing expenses and your investments that secure your brand building efforts and investments behind that, and ensure that that is a non-negotiable and done, while also securing budget to play in this space and do it properly. Because in China, you need to balance the need to build brands and the need to drive volumes that help you win against competition, and that is the tightrope that you have to manage. But the best way to honestly do it is to ring fence what is important for building your brand, right? And to ring fence the investments behind it, to ring fence the innovations that you will build that take the brand forward. At the end of the day, a brand is not just created by its advertising strength, it's created by the portfolio it has. So if your portfolio, for example, I'm using it as an example, if your portfolio in food is more health driven, the concept of discounting will not come in the way, because inherently you're building a brand around health, and that's the attribute you'll try and own. So I think it is a tightrope where you have to balance the nature of your innovations, your spends in brand building, and your spends in the e-commerce space to be able to holistically create a brand. I don't think it is a challenge just for global brands. It is a challenge for all brands.
Jump in with a question, Dhiren. It's really interesting. On the Q&A part, they wanted you to elaborate more on China's speed. And it kind of gave me some thought about how Kraft Heinz in China works with its agency partners, what percentage of things are done internally. You mentioned that you have an innovation center. One of the things that I find is that more and more brands are taking more of the agency responsibilities in-house. And the reason that they're doing that is because of what you just said, China's speed. Brands will say that the agency model is too slow to react to the trends that are happening. And the only way that you can really be on top of those trends is by reacting to them live. And that's the definition of China speed, in that you can react very, very quickly. But at the same time, is there a role for planning and building brand purpose on a longer term basis that agencies can still serve that role to brands in China? Or is the role being changed now to more of a role of just pure execution, that they're being tasked just to execute things that are being driven by brands and their innovation centers and their internal market products and things that they have inside the company?
So I'll tell you what I think on that. I certainly think there is a very solid role for agencies, because building brands and building foundations of brands and it doesn't go away, right? You need to have the rigor to create, depending on which company you work for, your brand plate, triangle, whatever you call it, but crafting that and ensuring that that is solid is very important. It's the most, actually, I would argue, even more important as you work with speed. That work cannot be done in-house. That you have to rely on agencies. I think where agencies falter is their inability to take that, which they're good at. They're good at creating brand proposition work and stuff like that, and being able to drive it through the full ecosystem in China. I'm yet to see, I think there are a couple of good examples, which I won't name on this call, but there are maybe only 2 or 3 people who, 2 or 3 agencies who are able to take a solid brand proposition through the full communication ecosystem that China offers. And I think that's where agencies fail. They simply have not been able to upskill themselves to be able to work through the communication ecosystem that is China. And so they are not able to execute at the speed and with the frequency that brands need for the level of their content today. Which is why a lot of the executional work, like I just explained in the presentation, is done in-house. I wish agencies were able to build the capability to be able to do some of this at that speed, because then that would take away a lot of responsibility from brands today. But in China, agencies don't have that today, and so a lot of brands are in-housing.
It's a good platform, actually, Dhiren, to ask some questions about skills and capabilities, actually, because those are often the questions our students have of our speakers. You know, and you've made this point about having that full set of capabilities that allows you to navigate across the entire, you know, communications ecosystem. So if you're putting yourself in the shoes, and I'm sure you've filled these shoes many times, of you know, talking to or mentoring some young emerging professionals, and the question really is, what skills and capabilities do I need to develop? You know, what are you looking for in people who might join your team, or, you know, working on an agency? So how would you advise, let's say, for example, a grad student at NYU School of Professional Studies? So.
I look for what I showed up front, right, which is marketing is a job of commercial crafting. The first thing you look for is crafting ability. At the end of the day, the person needs to be able to identify and craft a good proposition, needs to be able to have the ability to create content. I'm talking content first, I'll move to innovation. To be able to create content that delivers to that, which is engaging and different from what others can do. That's crafting. The person then needs to have the ability to create innovations, to understand the trends in the market, understand the landscape of the market, come up with innovative products that are in line with the brand's jobs to be done, craft them with the cross-functional teams and deliver them. That's so crafting, both from a communication and an innovation standpoint, is absolutely necessary. The second thing is commercial acumen. Marketers are, I keep saying this, marketing is a sales function. It's just that our tools are different, right? So they need to be able to have commercial acumen of understanding the sales numbers, understanding the share numbers, understanding profitability, understanding that whole ecosystem to identify what part of the mix needs to be changed, right? Sometimes the solution is not communication. Sometimes the solution is not an innovative product. Sometimes the solution is value engineering. Sometimes the solution is, you know, changing a pricing change. So having commercial acumen married with crafting are tools that I look for. In terms of soft skill, the person has to have the ability to collaborate. Marketing is a collaboration job. I could argue marketers don't do very much. They're just extremely good at telling people what they have to do and extremely good at following up and getting those things done. And so that skill needs to be there. You need to be able to collaborate with people and functions and get things done in the direction that's required for your brand and for your organization. So I look for collaboration as a key soft skill. So crafting, commercial acumen, and collaboration.
Fantastic. I've never heard this phrase, of commercial crafting, but I think it captures so well many of the things that we teach. Earlier in the day, we were talking with one of the heads of communications at IBM, but we were talking in a class that's called Finance for Marketing Decisions. So it's the idea of how do you learn the vocabulary of finance and business, as a marketer. So it's very much, I think, at the heart. I want to pivot perhaps to a quick question on data, and then I think we'll probably have to draw it to a close. We had a question about just as a sort of context, we talk a lot in the school about marketing being human-centered and data-driven. It's not an either-or or anything; it's a complementary thing. But there were some questions about sort of how you go about capturing all the data, because it's clearly, I think, part of your MO as well to be data-driven, given the challenge in China, as we understand, of data being behind walled gardens like Alibaba and Tencent, etc. So is there a way to synthesize, a practical way to synthesize lots of data, or is that a challenge people should be thinking about as well?
No, I actually don't think of there being a dearth of data. I mean, there being a challenge with having less data. I think there's actually more data than we actually need. Because I tend to look at data doing three things, right? In my simplistic head, which is there's data for inspiration that should be able to inspire you to make stuff, right? And that data essentially tends to be, social listening, for example, can be great inspiration stuff. Then all of the qualitative work you do, like the UNAs you do, consumer connects that hopefully all marketers are doing on an everyday basis, is data that you collect for inspiration that inspires your actions. The second data is your measurement data, which is data that measures the performance of either your output or input. So output measures would be your tracking data like shares and penetration and sales, those kind of things. And input is obviously your media metrics that you track, which there's enough of. The last data stack I call is validation, which is, as a marketer, things that you test to know whether you're on solid ground. And I think in all of these three, in China specifically, there's enough and more data to have from all the partners who will share it with you. I actually don't think that the challenge is behind the walled gardens. The challenge is in us creating a garden that can synthesize that data well enough for our company to use. I think marketers struggle with that more than anything else. And for us, I think we divide the data in specifically those forms, which is inspiration, measurement, and validation. And we ensure that we have enough of a data stack for all three. And then between the consumer insights team and the digital hub team, they manage that data for the organization.
I really like that formulation, actually, of the three ways to think about it. So you've written my next class here, Dhiren, tonight. This is fabulous. I love that idea about data that inspires you, data used to measure, and data used to validate. So a nice formulation. I think Paul has a final question. We could stay hours doing this. It's wonderful. It's really wonderful. But I'll turn it over to Paul, and then when we're done, if you want to just send it back my way.
Yeah, no. Thanks, Michael. What advice would you give your colleagues in other markets, right? Brands in other markets, right? What is it about? There's a lot about China. People reading a lot about China. There's China innovation, all this stuff, and this whole series is all about lessons from China, right? And how would you, understanding some of the challenges that either, your North American counterparts, your Asian, your APAC counterparts are facing, what sort of lessons being based here in Shanghai, and all the things we talk about, would you sort of distill out to them or to brands in other markets to drive growth?
I think the first is a practical advice that if you have a team that's based in China, the only way to allow them to succeed is to let them develop, deploy, and decide in China. It works the best, and you need to create an ecosystem that allows for that while maintaining the brand control. But you need to liberate and allow for that. So that's the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice actually is around the fact that, how do I say this in a good way? I think people should, everybody who has aspirations to be a seasoned marketer should spend some time in China, because what you will learn in China about delivering on the business, delivering content at speed, and delivering innovations at speed are skills that you can't develop if you're not in China. And once you have developed them, they will stay with you for life. And I think it simply just makes you a more skilled marketer. So I think a lot of companies should try and have their senior marketers or their talented marketers have a stint here. It's precisely why some of the biggest FMCG companies have CEOs who have done stints in China.
Yeah, I think, you know, we were en route to Shanghai, actually, some of us from the school in March of 2020, and unfortunately we had to cancel because of COVID. But I think we share with you, you know, that you know, belief, candidly. I mean, I probably even extend it to say, you know, you need to spend time in global markets generally. But we've been very blessed at the school to have such a, you know, diverse population, and folks from all over the world, you know, who can make those kind of exchanges. It's not the same clearly as being in China, but I think we're advantaged by having a lot of students from China. So I want to, you know, respectful of people's time, I want to sort of draw us to a close. Dhiren, I want to thank you, you know, very sincerely. I've just, as I said, captured some wonderful notes and sort of pithy quotes, and you're a very practiced speaker, and you've obviously given us a lot of reflection. So we appreciate you sharing that wisdom with us. And I'm certain on behalf of Bryce and Paul, we would thank you for joining us. We hope you're not a stranger. We would like to welcome you know back at the school, virtually or in person if you're in New York. And I certainly, for other friends, you know, who are calling in from all parts of the world, including India, if you're celebrating, we wish you happy Diwali, you know, and may it bring much health and wealth and happiness. So we love to celebrate the festivals as we go as well. So my sincere pleasure and thanks to you. For some of the questions in the Q&A, we're going to try and wrap them a little bit. We'll type in some answers. And for anybody on the call, and we'll send around a recording. Perhaps if Dhiren's able, he can share his presentation as well, but certainly it will be part of the recording. So on behalf of us all at the School of Professional Studies, many, many thanks, Dhiren. So
thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Have a good day, guys. Take care.
Very good.
Bye. Bye.